Coveney is the Tánaiste Minister for Foreign Affairs. He's with me in studio. Tánaiste, good morning.
Morning, Jonathan. Thanks for having me on.
Is a no deal more likely now?
No, well, I've always said that I think a no deal is unlikely. I still think that. I think there is a large majority of MPs in Westminster who will work to avoid that. Sometimes we don't hear that majority voice because you hear the extremes on both sides, because they're the ones that make headlines and they're the ones that look for microphones. But the truth is that a majority of people, both in the Conservative Party and in the Labour Party, and indeed others, like the Lib Dems and so on, recognise that a no-deal Brexit is very, very damaging for everybody, including Britain, and would also be hugely challenging to Ireland. I think they'll work to avoid that. The Prime Minister has a hell of a job on her hands now. She faces a motion of no confidence today, which I believe she'll win. But then she has said that she would come forward with a new approach to try to resolve the Brexit questions by Monday next, which means reaching out across party and, of course, within her own party to try and find a way of doing that.
But do you think she can do that? Because what we saw last night was a fractured Parliament. There's no consensus to be found.
That's true, but I'm not sure it was any surprise. I mean, we've known for quite some time what the Parliament doesn't want. But as she said last night, we still don't know what a majority in the Parliament actually do want. So we know there are large minorities in the Parliament looking for different things, whether it's another vote. A small minority, in my view, are happy to accept a no-deal Brexit under WTO rules from a trading perspective, which I believe would be a disaster for everybody.
But there's still voices who want a no-deal Brexit. And there are a minority,
obviously, who supported the Prime Minister's approach. But we don't have an indication as to what a majority of the British Parliament actually wants. So you say which is extraordinary, just over 70 days from them leaving.
You believe that a majority would not want no deal?
Oh, I mean, I know that. That there is... Look, I mean, there is a significant majority that understand the realities here. That a no-deal Brexit is damaging and negative for everybody. The EU, Ireland, but in particular the UK. And I believe that any government that allows that to happen would be held to account by the people on that. But look, that's a matter for British people and British politics. My role here is to ensure that we do everything we can to protect Irish interests, to protect Irish people, and to protect the relationship between Britain and Ireland, and of course the relationships on this island, and that we of course maintain solidarity and unity across the European Union, and all of those things we're very focused on now.
The law states that Britain is leaving on the 29th of March next.
Yeah.
If Britain were to ask for an extension on that Article 50 departure, would Ireland agree?
Well, I mean, we won't be an obstacle to that. I mean, I've said that, the Taoiseach has said that as well. But I think...
For how long, though?
No, but I think just more fundamental to that is that if the British government is going to ask the EU to accept an extension of Article 50, I think there needs to be a plan with that, because I think the EU needs to understand what Britain is actually now asking for. Are they going to change their red lines that have been outlined over and over again? How do they address the concerns, and their legitimate concerns, that the EU has? And I mean, I've said this many times, this isn't just about Britain and their interests and their ambitions for the future. It's also about the EU. Britain is asking the EU to facilitate an orderly, managed Brexit. The EU wants to do that in a way that is fair to the UK, but is also protective of core EU concerns. One of those concerns is Ireland, the peace process here, preventing physical border infrastructure or related checks or controls between the two jurisdictions on this island, for good reason. The British Prime Minister also supports that approach. So
Parliament supports that, because there was an amendment put forward to the bill last night about limiting the time on the backstop, and there was 600 in favour and 23 against. So that gives you...
Sorry, the other way around.
Other way around,
600
sorry.
against.
600 against. So that shows you that the backstop is a smokescreen.
Well, I think certainly you could read that into the vote, that, you know, those that said, well, if we just were more reasonable on the backstop, that this deal would have gone through. I think that vote shows that perspective to be nonsense. You know, I mean, the British Prime Minister has been a very strong advocate of the need for a backstop as a reassurance mechanism, as a fallback position, to show that if we can't resolve the border issues through a comprehensive future relationship, well then this is the insurance mechanism that can reassure people in Northern Ireland that they're not going to see physical border checks in the future. And I think, to her credit, she continues to hold that position, and I believe the EU will also hold that position. And those that criticise the backstop have an obligation to talk about and propose credible alternatives, and they've yet to do that. And that's the truth of it. I mean, some people talk about wishing away the problem here, saying, well, the British government doesn't want border infrastructure, the Irish government doesn't want border infrastructure, the EU doesn't want border infrastructure, so what are we worrying about? I mean, that's kindergarten thinking in some ways. And as the British Prime Minister has said, you have to have a legal mechanism to ensure that you follow through on preventing border infrastructure. Otherwise, it could happen as an unintended consequence.
Well, could it still happen on the 29th if there's no deal? Could there be border infrastructure that you have to put in place? Because, I mean, there are questions over what you're doing at Auchnacoy and Strabane by flattening land next to the border. I mean, what is going on there?
Well, I mean, certainly we're not preparing for border infrastructure.
So what are you doing then?
What I have said is that the way in which we provide guarantees that no border infrastructure between the two jurisdictions on this island will re-emerge as a consequence of Brexit is to support the deal that we spent 2 years negotiating, that the British Prime Minister also stands over, we stand over, and the EU is in complete solidarity on. And I don't think it's helpful for us to start talking about other ways of doing that.
But you're clearly doing something in Auchnacoy and Strabane?
Nothing to do with the border. That's for sure. The obligation is on those that actually argue against the backstop to actually talk about alternatives. And what some would like is to move away from the responsibility that London has on this issue and put it all on Dublin. And we can't allow that to happen.
I know, I appreciate that, but Henry was up there last week, Henry McKean of the station, that the OPW is apparently looking at land around that part of the border, flattening parts of it. I mean, that sounds like it's to do with potential border infrastructure.
Well, let me tell you very clearly, Jonathan, because, you know, that's a leading question with respect. We are not putting preparations in place for border infrastructure, and we're not going to start doing that either. There is an obligation on those who reject the approach that the British Prime Minister has negotiated and agreed to in the context of a backstop as an insurance mechanism. There's an obligation on those people, if they reject that approach, to propose a credible alternative approach, and it's not there. That's the truth, and that is why, in my view, any withdrawal agreement in the future will include a backstop. And what may change here, I hope, is the approach of the British government in terms of the red lines that they outline to reassure people that the backstop will never be used.
You were caught on microphone, which is it's not unheard of, at the end of last night's press conference. You had said during the press conference, I would anticipate there would be checks.
No, I didn't say that.
Well, okay. I'm quoting. Sorry, Shane Ross may have said that. Shane Ross, yeah, the border one. Should I have not said that? Simon Coveney, yes, but we can't get into where they'll be at this stage. They could be in the sea. They could be. But once you start talking about checks anywhere near the border, people will start delving into that, and all of a sudden we'll be the government that reintroduced a physical border on the island of Ireland. Yeah. Shane Ross, yeah, but I didn't know what to say. So therefore, correct. Shane Ross said I would anticipate there would be checks. You're saying no.
And I intervened when that was said to say that's not the case.
Did you have to shut down Shane Ross?
No. Look, I mean, I think that what Shane was reflecting and what I reflected was what's already been agreed in the backstop, which is that if there isn't a future relationship, there isn't a trading agreement that resolves the border issue, that what the backstop proposes is that there would be limited checks on goods travelling from Great Britain into Northern Ireland in order to protect the integrity of the EU single market, because there would be no barriers between Northern Ireland and Ireland. and I reflected that in the comments and clarification that I made to Shane at the end of that press conference. So there's nothing new there, even though people are trying to create something new out of that comment.
But are you not saying there will be checks at some point? There has to be checks at some point.
But that's what the backstop says.
Okay,
Jonathan. No. Like, let's just be clear on that, because
are checks not a border?
No. What has been agreed, the way in which the backstop works, is that if we can't agree a future relationship that doesn't involve any border infrastructure at all, in other words, creates the closest possible trading relationship between the UK and the EU, and therefore obviously Northern Ireland and Ireland as well. If that doesn't deal comprehensively with the border issue, the fallback or the insurance mechanism is the backstop. The backstop involves some limited checks on goods travelling from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, because the EU, understandably, has to protect the integrity of its single market.
But you're not saying where they'll be yet, because we don't know, because that's subject to the further agreement.
What we are saying is that we support the approach if it's as a last resort. That is the backstop, which has been explained many times, that involves some checks across the Irish Sea for goods travelling from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, not the other way.
I want to play a clip of Arlene Foster, who has strong opinions on this as well. Let's have a listen to her interpretation about the border, what may or may not happen.
There is no need for the backstop. Lord Lilly has already made reference to the fact that the Irish Prime Minister has indicated that he will not be putting up a hard border on the island of Ireland. You know, as someone who lived through the Troubles, we never had a hard border. There were 20,000 soldiers in Northern Ireland, and they couldn't hermetically seal the border in Northern Ireland. So it is a bit of a nonsense, frankly, to talk about a hard border.
Do you agree with Arlene Foster? We never had a hard border.
I don't. I mean, I know what she's trying to say, but I think it's unfortunate language in terms of how she said it. But to refer to this issue as a nonsense, I think is also wrong. You speak to businesses who trade across that border every day, about 7,500 of them in Northern Ireland, and the people that they employ and the commerce that's generated around that. You speak to farmers who sell across that border all the time. About every year, about 500,000 lambs come south across the border to be slaughtered. Every year, nearly 40% of milk on Northern Ireland farms comes across the border to be processed. Every year, hundreds of thousands of cattle move from the west of Ireland on small farms purchased in marts. They go across the border into the north to be finished and slaughtered. This is the kind of normality that we've managed to create on the island of Ireland, north and south, where commerce has actually overcome division in the past. And that is what we are trying to protect here in the context of ensuring that we don't have physical barriers to trade, or checks that prevent trade, or tariffs that prevent that trade. And I think that if you go to Northern Ireland, as I have, you will listen to businesses, unionist and nationalist and other, who are almost unanimous from my experience in their view that there is an onus here on politicians to prevent hard border infrastructure. And, you know, Arlene can describe it in any way she wants, but the reality here is that the British Prime Minister herself has recognised this issue now for quite some time, has been a strong advocate for the backstop as an insurance and reassurance mechanism, and that is also our position. And that is why we say, just to finish the point, that's why we say any withdrawal agreement that is finalised between the EU and the UK, in my view, will need to have that insurance mechanism as part of it.
In the madness that is Brexit, we now have Arlene Foster, who's said something that you disagree with and that Theresa May disagrees with. They're now
there's nothing new there.
But the DUP now have to prop up Theresa May in the vote of no confidence tonight, showing how bonkers this entire process is. And as you correctly say, it's now back onto Britain to come up with another plan, the Plan B. And the only Plan B that seems to be mentioned at all is Norway or Norway Plus. Is Norway or Norway Plus an option, do you think? Do you think that the 26 other European Union countries would buy that, never mind ourselves?
Well, I mean, I think it would be wrong for me to anticipate what the British government is going to look for in a new approach. I think we have to show some patience here for the next few days. Time is short, but the Prime Minister has said that she will be back to Parliament with a new approach by Monday, which is a few days. So I think what Ireland needs to do for the next few days is to continue to plan for a worst case scenario, which is a no-deal Brexit. And I think we need to hold our nerve, allow the process take its course in Westminster for the next few days, where undoubtedly there will be a lot of conversation, hopefully cross-party conversation, around how a majority can be won in Westminster for a new approach that recognises the realities of the concerns that the EU has in relation to Brexit, as well as the concerns and ambition that Britain has.
So you wouldn't rule Norway in or out no more than you'd rule a second vote in or out?
Well, I don't think we should rule anything in or out. But the one thing that I will say I'm confident of is that the EU will remain united, that solidarity with Ireland and the Irish vulnerability around Brexit will remain very, very strong. And the need to protect the Irish peace process and to protect an all-island economy and to prevent physical border infrastructure, I believe unity around that issue in the European Union will remain strong through this process. And I believe also that the British Prime Minister will continue to recognise that in her approach.
You are confident enough that no deal is not going to happen based on the maths in Parliament in Westminster. But of course you can't guarantee anything, which means that we are preparing for something that may or may not happen. That was the case before the vote yesterday. It's the case today as well. But can you adequately prepare for no deal? If the Dáil sat through non-stop between now and the 29th of March, passing legislation and doing whatever it can this government, can this state adequately prepare for Britain crashing out of the European Union without there being extremely negative consequences for the people on this island?
Well, I mean, I've said that there is no contingency plan, no matter how comprehensive it is, and by the way, I believe it'll be very comprehensive, but no matter how comprehensive a contingency plan is, we can't protect and maintain the status quo that we have today if there is a no-deal Brexit. Britain, a country the size of the United Kingdom and an economy the size of the United Kingdom, leaving the European Union without a deal has enormous consequences. We have a €75 billion trade relationship every year, east-west, between the UK and Ireland. And we are obviously trying to protect that, and we have broken it up into different areas in terms of contingency planning. We published quite a long document at the end of December. We had extended discussions on detailed contingency plans yesterday in government in terms of guaranteeing the supply of medicines into Ireland, in terms of our ports and airports, in terms of getting goods to and from this island in the context of a no-deal Brexit.
Could you accept it is a disaster? If this goes ahead with a no deal, it is a disaster for our economy.
Sure, I've always said that that's the worst possible outcome. It's negative and challenging for everybody, and it's avoidable. And I have always said that I believe we will find a way of avoiding a no-deal Brexit, and there is a strong majority in Westminster who want to avoid a no-deal Brexit. I mean, the Prime Minister herself has said in the last 48 hours that she believes that no Brexit is a more likely outcome than a no-deal Brexit.
Have you spoken to Europe about them coming in and helping us, be it through financial aid, through shipments, if it happens, through some other types of support? Have you had those conversations with Brussels?
We have, of course, in areas around the application or non-application of state aid rules, for example, in terms of contingency planning, supporting vulnerable sectors.
Have they agreed?
It'll be no surprise, that my party and this government is very supportive of the agri-food industry and of farming in Ireland. This is a sector that's hugely vulnerable. The fishing industry, the same, hugely vulnerable. And we need to support and help these sectors through the extraordinary demands and stresses of a no-deal Brexit, should that happen. And we are putting contingency plans in place in terms of what we can do here, domestically ourselves, and of course in cooperation with the European institutions and the European Commission in particular. But that being said, regardless of how comprehensive those contingency plans are, a no-deal Brexit would put a huge amount of strain on our economy, and we will work to avoid that. But
it's out of your control. The point is, it's out of your control. Lisa Chambers was on this programme earlier this week saying what you're doing isn't enough and that you can and should be doing more.
Yeah, but look, I mean, she's the opposition spokesperson, so no matter what we do, it'll never be enough. I mean, that's the nature of adversarial politics. But, I speak to Lisa all the time. We briefed her yesterday in detail on what was discussed and agreed at Cabinet. I think she, by and large, accepts that. We talked to Fianna Fáil about an approach to towards a very large piece of legislation which will have lots of different elements to it, 17 different elements in fact. If you like, 17 pieces of legislation in one.
An omnibus.
An omnibus or a mega bill or whatever you want to call it. And we discussed the mechanisms that we would need to put in place to get that done by the middle of March.
That again will only go so far if there is a shortage of drugs or a perceived shortage of drugs. We saw what happened in this country when there was a shortage of bread.
I think, but let's not raise fears now in a way that's irresponsible. The Department of Health and Simon Harris came forward yesterday with a detailed contingency plan, or an update on their contingency planning, I should say, to be accurate, to Cabinet. And Simon Harris has reassured people that they shouldn't be stockpiling, that there isn't going to be a shortage of drugs after Brexit, and that there is a huge amount of work going on by the relevant agencies, working with the private sector and the pharmaceutical industry to make sure, and indeed the European Commission, to make sure that that's the case. So, we need to be careful in our language here. Yes, there are huge challenges to a no-deal Brexit, but there are some fundamental areas where our contingency planning will protect Irish interests, and medicines is one of those.
Okay. Amid all of this, you obviously have been involved in Irish politics all your adult life. It is often described as chaotic. It is often described as shambolic. It is the source of frustration amongst all the people who are listening right now. But when you look at what's happening across the water right now with people that you would have sat across from the negotiating table with many times over the years, and the level to which it has gone, are you concerned that one of the oldest parliamentary democracies in the world can end up at this cataclysmic point with no certainty about what the outcome is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, there are. You don't say this too often in your political life, but I mean, we are watching history unfold before our eyes at the moment, in terms of the future direction that Britain is going to take, its relationship with Ireland, with the EU. We are living through extraordinarily uncertain times in terms of British politics, and of course the impact and fallout of that is very direct for Ireland. I have to say, and politics gets a lot of criticism at times, but the way in which the Irish political system is responding across parties, parties that are in intensive competition with each other, if you like, in many ways, and fundamentally disagree with each other on many issues. Parties like Fine Gael and Sinn Féin, for example, or Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, are working now across government and opposition to make sure that Ireland can protect itself as best we can from the uncertainty in Westminster. I'm somebody who in some ways is a product of the Anglo-Irish relationship. I was in university in England. I worked in Scotland for a while. I'm one of 7 children. Many of us developed our careers in England and in British cities before we came back home. So, my objective here is to try to protect a relationship that's hugely important for Ireland, that is the British-Irish relationship, to try to ensure that we can get through Brexit without too many scars, and that we can protect a strong and positive relationship that both Britain and Ireland needs to ensure is part of our relationship in the future. So that's where I'm coming from here, and we want the closest possible future relationship in that regard.
Is the Taoiseach going to contact Theresa May today?
I don't know, but I mean, I would expect that there will be a conversation between the Prime Minister and the Taoiseach at some stage over the next few days. But I think Theresa May has a lot on her plate today. She's facing a challenge to the very existence of her government in terms of a motion no confidence. As I said, I believe she will win that. But then I think she faces the next big challenge, which is between now and Monday, finding a way of having a credible plan and a credible ask of the EU.
So Monday's the deadline for as far as you and Europe are concerned?
Well, I mean, that is the deadline that Theresa May has set for herself.
Okay.
And it's the deadline that her Parliament has also set for her in a vote this week. So let's continue to talk to the British government as we will, and let's hope that we can see a sensible consensus emerging by next Monday that Ireland can be helpful in delivering in terms of a managed, sensible Brexit that protects core Irish interests.
Was one non-Brexit related question, just to give you a little bit of respite given everything that's going on.
To give your listeners maybe a bit of respite as well. I think they're probably getting sick of me talking about Brexit.
A texter has said, as a dairy farmer, I'm very glad that the Tánaiste is on voice on this life-changing issue of Brexit. He understands the livelihoods of those outside the pale, and this is the non-Brexit bit. Leo's beef comments were silly and damaging to an already struggling industry. This is where the Taoiseach said he was going to eat less meat to try and reduce his carbon footprint. Do you agree with him? Are you aiming for less meat in your diet?
Look, I mean, all I'd say to you is, look, I mean, I think, you know, a lot has been read into those comments that aren't fair. I mean, judge this government on how it responds to farmers, how it has helped to build and protect an agri-food industry which has grown massively actually through the recessionary period. Through part of that period I was Minister for Agriculture, and I'm very proud of what we did then.
And you have a farming background.
And I have a farming background. This government will continue to protect the food industry and farming and farm families and rural communities through Brexit and through any other challenges that we face.
Have you decided to eat less meat as the Taoiseach?
No, I haven't.
And have you any intention of eating less meat?
No, I mean, I believe that Ireland produces meat and dairy product to a very high standard, and actually in relative terms to a very low carbon intensity. But we have an obligation, and I would say this very directly to farmers as a person who supports them and works with them. We have to continue to do more. To actually be an example to the rest of the world of how you produce food at a very low carbon footprint and a very low carbon intensity. We have an obligation to do that in terms of the climate change challenge that we face. And we will work with farming organisations and with farm families to help them do that. OK,
Tánaiste and Minister for Foreign Affairs Simon Coveney, thank you very much for joining us. 53106, how do you think the Brexit mess is going to play out? Let us know. We'll take your text across the morning. Lots more to come on the topic as well. But up next...